Hello and welcome back to the Wheel Talk podcast. My name is Abby Mickey and I'm here with friends to talk about professional women's road cycling. We've got quite the race to talk about today. With me, Gracie Alvin.
Hello, everybody.
And Lauren Rowney.
G'day, everyone from sunny, beautiful Belgium.
It actually does look sunny, like there's sun coming in the window.
Yeah, no, it is stunning. We've got this like perfect transition week from winter to spring happening. Full sun. It's really gorgeous. So I think Lessemin is on today, perhaps. So the riders are gonna have a nice
Correct.
day out there.
Yeah, as people are listening to this, Lessemin will be finished, but nice to know that they get a little bit of sun because it seemed like it was a pretty cold weekend. There wasn't any rain, no precipitation, but it was definitely a bit overcast, and perhaps the negative vibes of the weather impacted the negative vibes of the race, but we'll dive into that. We're also going to preview Strade Bianche, which is coming up this week, and also, hopefully sunny there as well. That's always a really fun race, but let's start off. We're going to talk about both of the Omloops that happened this weekend, starting with Omloop Het Nieuwsblad. The opening weekend of the classics, not necessarily opening weekend of bike racing anymore, but the opening weekend of the cobbled classics. And normally this race is just full gas, really, really exciting. But this year we had a bit of a different vibe. A breakaway of 5 went off the front of the race within the first 10 kilometers. It became a group of 4 that gained over 13 minutes on the peloton. With 50 kilometers to go, they still had such a huge gap that there was pretty much no way that it was coming back together. On the Muur van Gerritsbergen, which I can't say it, Muur van Gerritsbergen, it doesn't have like 5 names. Muur Kapelmuur?
Yeah.
Is that a different one? Yeah.
The Kapelmuur is the same. I don't know.
Yeah. It's
That
really
one.
confusing. Anyway.
The iconic climb.
The Chapelmuur, because it's got the chapel at the top.
On top. Yeah, it's really cool, that chapel at the top. I remember pre-riding this race and we stopped there and it was like, it's just so beautiful. And also, if anyone ever goes to this race, there's a really, really good pastry shop right at the bottom of this climb, in case anyone happens to venture that way. Anyway, on that climb, the 2 riders broke away from the other 2 and rode to the finish alone. Lotte Klaas won against Aurélien Nerlo of Winspace. And Lotte Klaas took probably the biggest win of her career, definitely the biggest win of her career so far from Arkea B&B Hotels. The Belgian rider was absolutely shocked to take this victory. Behind them, the race blew up on the same climb, and it was Demi Vollering and Puck Pieterse who rode away from the rest to fight for third. Demi finished third in the end, and there's a lot to talk about.
Where to start?
I think we should start with the winner, because I think that there's so much to talk about with this race and everything that didn't happen in the race that we could kind of lose sight of the actual winner of the race, Lotte Klaas, who she didn't expect to win Omloop Het Nieuwsblad when she woke up. Obviously, like every single rider on the start line will dream of winning a World Tour race in their career, but I don't think that Lotte Klaas woke up on Saturday morning and was like, I'm going to win this race. She went in the early break, the doomed breakaway, they say, and they ended up, because of tactics in the peloton and maybe some other factors, they ended up with so much time that there was no way that this race was going to come back together, and she rode away with it. She tried to attack Nerlo near the finish to kind of get away from her, but in the end she didn't need that gap. She won the sprint of 2 to the line, and her just absolute joy. She was just radiating joy. And also Arkea B&B, the team watching her on the podium was like some really good vibes, and it was cool to see. And I think like there's a lot of negativity that can be said about this race and how it was raced, but seeing how happy she was at the finish line, how surprised she was, the whole team, it was a bright spot in what was otherwise a very confusing day of women's cycling.
Yeah, I agree. It was a long day out there for him. I mean, to go from 10 kilometers to go. And when we got live coverage, immediately I was like, okay, she is the strongest. You could see it, strongest rider in this group of 4 that's there. And with that sort of gap, I was wondering how it would play out, but I had a feeling based on Lotta's previous sort of results. If you go back and have a look, she is quite a good climber. I mean, she finished 16th in the GC at the Tour de France Femme last year. She's got a few top fives in some of the harder, like 2.1 races. So she is a good rider, a name that most people probably don't know, but she is talented for sure. She comes, I think, from probably a duathlon background, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, she's like brand new to the cycling world. So she's been racing for 4 years, but 2 years of that was duathlon. She's a nurse, and she's been on like one of those reality TV shows that I think like one of the it's Belgian, Lauren, so I don't know if you've heard of it.
Like an
Camp
SAS
West?
one.
Oh, she was on Camp
SAS.
West. No way.
Yeah, the Special Forces style challenge TV show. She's only 31, but yeah, she's only been in the peloton for a couple years. Like she is absolutely fresh. And she was definitely the strongest in that breakaway. And it's hard to say whether or not, after hearing from other riders on bigger teams, whether or not that gap got out because the break was strong or because people were playing chicken with each other. But I mean, they had to be strong enough to get away in the first place. And this race is such a hard race. Like, it doesn't seem like it would be as hard as something like Flanders, but it's so early in the year. Everyone is fresh. You're fresh to the cobbles, and the weather is normally bad. It's a brutal race, this one. So even to get in the breakaway, she had to be strong enough to get in the breakaway. So it definitely was like, yeah, really impressive that someone who was so new to racing was able to get in the break in the first place, let alone win the race overall.
Yeah, it was a bit frustrating that the coverage started with about 40k to go, because I would have loved to have seen those opening kilometers. And it, I don't know if that was the first attack of the day or not, and what other teams were trying to get involved. And then the scramble of, there would have been some teams that were looking around, do we chase or not, before that stalemate kind of really set in. So, and there's some tough sections in that mid part of the race as well that I would have been keen to see both the break and the peloton navigate. So I think that we could have seen a better story if we got to see more of the race. But I agree with you, Abby. Like, I think it was a bit of column A and column B. Like, that break of 4 was underrated. They were strong. And then the peloton just really stuffed up.
Yeah, so I think we should talk about that, right? It's Tuesday now. And
go on forever about this.
But there's been a lot of communication in the media about this, and about how radio, radio control or whatever, they weren't working. But honestly, as pointed out by multiple people, there are Swannies there on the road. So as a Swanee, if you were sitting there and then you saw that the group of 5 actually it was at the start, came past, and then 14 minutes later came the peloton, wouldn't you be like texting the DS, and there's always 2 in the car, going, yeah, I don't know. Or if I was the DS and there was no radio control, opposite way around, I would be texting the Swannies or someone else to say, do you know what's going on right now? How big is this gap? Because I think, yeah, with 5 riders, 14 minutes, at some point, you had to start working. I would say already at 80 kilometers to go with a 14-minute gap.
Yeah, I mean, it was confusing immediately after the race, trying to figure out what exactly had happened, because the live coverage started. They had so much time with 50 kilometers to go, 13 minutes. And you were watching that and you're like, what the heck happened? Especially if, like someone, the casual viewer who just tuned in when the live coverage started and hadn't been, following it on the live tracker before then, which there is a live tracker. Like the live coverage hasn't started yet, because obviously the DSs, there's 2 DSs in the car, one driving and one in the passenger seat. So they are watching the live coverage when it starts. But that second DS who's not driving the car is following along the race on the live ticker that's available. Like the UCI has one available sometimes, and like Pro Cycling Stats has one available. Cycling News has one going. So like there's information on the internet about the race before the live coverage even starts, and there's people on the roadside. So even if the radio tour wasn't working, which we've heard from people that they weren't getting correct time gaps over the radio, or there wasn't any radio at all in the cars, that there's still ample ways to find information. And I feel like it depended on the team. Like some teams knew that the time gap was massive and chose not to chase. And some teams were like, oh, but the radio wasn't working, which is kind of a bullshit excuse, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree.
There were teams, yeah, like that. Yeah, there's like races like, you know, this has been compared to the Olympic road race in Tokyo.
Oh, God.
And that's a completely different situation because they don't have radios at all. The riders don't have radios. But it's not like the riders' radios weren't working. It would have been race radio that wasn't working. And that's completely different because you can get that information elsewhere and relay it to the team. And I feel like there's like multiple conversations we need to have. The conversation about, you know, what certain teams chose to do, whether or not the impetus was on those teams in the first place, and the role of race radio within teams and directors and how teams react to certain situations like this. Like there's like three major conversations that could be had here, because race radios are something that, especially in the last couple of years, but I feel like forever, have been a huge topic of conversation. And obviously the UCI last year has kind of tried to change the rules around race radios and like taken them out of had taken them away for certain days. Like they were testing having the men only, I think only one rider has a radio to the car during the tour for a stage or two or whatever. They were doing that with the men's side. And obviously they want to try to figure out a different way to race than with radios. I am a huge supporter of radios, like riders having radios for safety. But obviously one of the reasons why people are against radios is because they feel that riders need to race their bikes on instinct. And this was very much a situation where you had DSs in the car telling teams that they didn't need to chase, and a lot of grumpy riders at the finish line because they basically didn't get to race their bike at all on Saturday. So this is like the one situation where I'm like, okay, DS is in the car making the call. I don't love it.
Yeah, and I think that it's just also telling that we don't have that many strong team captains in the peloton. In some teams, potentially. Like I think, thinking back to some of the teammates I've had over the years, there's a few in my mind that I know would make a different call on the road and go back to the car and have a bit of a debate about it with the director. They wouldn't just take it lying down, or they would just decide, no, I think you're wrong, and they would make the call for the team. And that is the role of the team captain ultimately, to have that final say. Like you're supposed to be able to have the final call as a team captain, but I think a lot of riders are so scared of taking that on, or they don't even know that they can, that they just let the team or themselves be dictated by those directors. And, you know, some of those directors, to put it nicely, have strong personalities and they like to be in control of their team. So you can kind of see how this has happened in that, yeah, they've all been kind of stunted in their way that they can race.
Yeah, and like there were one of the, I don't know if we can say this on the podcast, but there was one of the reports after the race was basically like, it was like a which DS can keep their dick in their pants the longest. And it was very much like an FDJ Suez, Lars Boom versus Danny Stam of SC Works Pro Time, who were working together the last couple of years, both DSs on SC Works, and Lars left the team last year to work for FDJ Suez. And those are the two biggest teams with the two favorites in the race, that those are the teams that drop the ball. Like they pointed at other teams and were like, I think it was Weebus who said, Little Trek could have chased. It's like, why would Little Trek chase? They don't have a favorite in this race. Like they are missing a lot of their top riders. Shirin was out after, she's still recovering from her iliac artery surgery. She's going to come back later in the season. She already said that. Anna Henderson was out. Like they're missing a lot of their top riders. they had no reason to chase. Like,
and they actually did chase a little bit with Ellen.
When Ellen got on the front, that's the only time the gap looked like, oh
Little
man,
too
it's
late,
coming
huh?
down real fast. Yeah. But
Yeah.
like, they didn't need to chase. Like, UAE didn't need to chase. There was so many teams that just didn't need to chase. The teams that did need to chase were FDJ Suez and SC Works Pro Time, because they had Lorena Wiebes, who was definitely a favorite coming in, and Demi Vollering. And I think they're both really interesting for different reasons. Like, SC Works Pro Time is really interesting that they didn't chase, because this is something that they do. This is a tactic that they use often. And it seemed like last year the Peloton got sick of it and they just weren't going to allow it anymore. But there's been so much shift in the Peloton this year and so many changes in rider transfers coming into this season that it did really seem like nobody really knew what to do yet. And FDJ Suez, they are coming into this race, the first Cobble Classics of the season, with a race favorite, and that's a situation that they've never been in before. They don't know how to handle that situation. Like, they have never gone into a race with the number one favorite ever, and that was pretty obvious, despite the fact that Lars Boom should know what to do when you go into a race with the top favorite. And they kind of had a couple riders on the front, like they were toying with the idea of chasing, but those two teams, like, I feel like if you're disappointed in how the race went on Saturday, you're looking at those two teams and like Puck Peterse saying that like it wasn't on them to chase, and she was annoyed that there wasn't more action on the front. Like, that's legit, because it really wasn't on Phoenix Sekunik to chase, you know? Like, yeah, it was just such an interesting situation for multiple reasons across all of these teams.
Yeah, and it kind of feels like it's not the first time that ST Works has done something like this, but it's like there's almost like another layer to it than it has in the past, of it's not just this tactic anymore. It's like they just don't want Demi to win, and I know that that's probably going to be a storyline that will get bit done to death this year, but like at the end of the day, you're a team, you're a pro team, you're one of the best in the world, you're there to win races, and they said that they were not sure if Lorena was going to make it over the Mur, but like, if you're starting her in the first place, it means that you're taking her there to win the race, and you ride that race according to her strengths, and you put riders around her to protect her in certain moments, and you put riders on the front to ride her back if need be, or ride back a breakaway. So that would have been their only tactic anyway, aside from their second card in Bredewald, who could have made it over the Mur potentially with Vollering. In the end, she didn't. But like, that's where you change your tactics straight away, and you put those riders on the front immediately as soon as everyone gets over the Mur, and you ride it back, because you don't have a lot of time, but you do have just enough time to a winning position. It is possible. I think that also was an excuse for them in those in the post-race interview that just didn't fly.
Yeah, I mean, like, Fight for Georgie also said it wasn't on them to chase, and that's kind of true. But like, at a certain point, the whole Peloton was racing for fifth, and that's not why you line up to a race, you know? Like, you line up to a race to win, and if you're gonna race this negatively, like, why even bother, you know? Like, there were moments of it that were really exciting, but overall I feel like it was disappointing. And what's the most disappointing is that we're coming off of this high in women's cycling last year, where we got a ton of new fans in the sport. People are really excited about it. You know, we had the best Tour de France, the best final stage of a Tour de France ever, men's and women's. And this is one of the first big races of the year that people are tuning into. And it doesn't really make women's cycling look good that this is how it was raced. And what really sucks is that naysayers, will look at this race and say, oh, this is why we don't watch women's cycling. Like, women's cycling is boring. But it was the men in the cars that were making this decision. So it just like really, really sucks from that perspective. And you could tell the riders at the finish were really disappointed in how the race went. Like, Demi Vollering looked just very surly on the podium. Like, she was not happy, and rightly so. She raced for third, and that's not what she wants to do. She wants to race for first. And so it's just like such a huge bummer that, you know, that we're kind of, this race added fuel to the fire of like, oh, this is why you shouldn't watch women's cycling, when it wasn't really the women in the peloton weren't the reason that the race went the way that it did.
I think going forwards, do you think we'll see this happen again? At some point in the year, perhaps, but I mean, you would think now with Strade coming up, another World Tour race on the weekend, a completely different race to Omloop Het Nieuwsblad, but it's still got like, you know, those really important sectors where there are opportunities for the race to go. And as mentioned in an article, who's going to capitalize off the bigger teams racing this way? It's just the smaller teams. And they see this and they'll be having this discussion. And we've seen previously that this is actually how Phoenix de Koenig has capitalized off this standoff between big teams, is that you just race your own race. You go in with your plan, you stick to it, and look what happened. I mean, we've seen this a few times now where this early break has stuck, or a break that maybe you didn't necessarily think would go to the finish. But as soon as there's that hesitation, this is exactly what happened. So from that respect, I hope that the DSs of the bigger teams have gone all right. That was a clusterfuck. Let's look towards the next races, and whatever happens between FDJ and SD Works, if something like that happens again, we just continue to race our own race, and we put people where we need to put people. And I think Trek has always been Little Trek has been good at doing that previously. And I still really believe they have the strength in a team like that. You've got UAE that's newly formed, and I'm really excited to see. I'm sure Elisa was watching this and shaking her head. So them going into Strade Bianche, I don't think they're going to sit back and wait for the race.
It is really interesting though, Lauren. I think I'm not sure if it's going to happen again. Like, it could definitely happen again, because tactically they're being stupid. Like, all they need to do is put one rider on the front. No break in women's cycling should probably go to 14 minutes. Like 10 minutes, I think they're letting them go to 8 or 10 minutes, which we've never really seen before, except for in the last maybe 3 to 5 years. And that's kind of been more interesting to be like, oh, cool, we're playing the early break game now, finally. This is exciting. Are they going to get them? Are they not? But like, the races are generally too short, and generally we don't have those massive climbs that you can make up a huge deficit, that you wouldn't really let it go much more than 10 minutes. And you literally just need to put one person on the front and get one other team to put another one person on the front. Hopefully you get another team or two to put one in. And that's where the directors need to be talking to each other in the radios or however they like to communicate. But also those team captains in the bunch need to be doing the same, to be like, hey, like, it's a mutual respect thing as well. Like, we need to work together, because it's defeatist to be like, we're not going to work with you because you have Demi or you have Lorena or whatever. Like, you're pretty much saying, oh, we don't have a rider that's better than your rider, so I'm not going to help. And then they all just race so negatively. And it can happen in smaller group situations as well. And Strade might be an example like that, where it's a race of attrition and then you only have 10 or 20 left in the last 30 kilometers. And you've got a whole handful of favourites in there that mark each other out. And again, it's the same situation of someone being able to slip up the road because everyone's looking at each other, and they don't want to risk it, so they all lose.
That's like 100% correct, Gracie. And I feel if we saw like what racing was maybe 15 years ago, where it was really the captains on the road, because the radios weren't so good, so often you didn't even really get much communication. So if communication through the radios, this is a hypothetical, was purely safety based and a little bit of information like come back for bottles or whatever, and then you were giving the riders a plan before they went into the race, but giving the power to the captains and the riders on the road so they could take ownership of the race, I think we would see things play out differently. Because I remember as well, I love watching that actually. On the coverage is seeing the team captains come together and have a chat about different situations. Like you'll have your Lizzie Diagnans talking with your now Elisa Longoborghinis and saying, yeah, I bet you're not happy with the situation. Are you ready to commit one rider? We'll commit one rider. Or maybe you should commit 2 riders because you have slightly more interest. Yeah, I wonder moving forwards if the captains, like I can imagine the captains weren't very happy with how it all unfolded and probably not having the power to say something in the moment because, like you said, Abby, everyone was pretty grumpy at the finish line. So in a perfect world, that would be a good thing to see in a way, is like to see the captains have more power on the road again, and the DSs sitting back a bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's like a couple points to be made about how this will impact the future of racing this year. One of them being this race didn't really have all of the favorites in it. Like usually we see all of the big names lining up to Omloop, but Elisa Longoborghini was missing. She would have been a really good person to follow that move by Demi on the Muir. We didn't have Kopecky, obviously, which if she had been in the race, I'm sure SC Works would have put a lot more effort into chasing everything down. We didn't have Van de Breggen, and Van de Breggen raced the next day, and Omloop van het Hageland was amazing. It was just like nonstop action the whole time, and it really looked like, Van de Breggen. We'll talk a little bit more about Hageland because I think it was a really good race, but Van de Breggen was all over that race, and had she been in the race on Saturday, I think it would have been a completely different race because she clearly has more. She is a veteran rider who can dictate what her team does without the DS questioning a decision that she makes, which can't be said of every team's captain, really. Like you pointed out, Lauren. Also, looking into the future of how races are going to go, Demi Vollering's attack on the Muir and how easy it was for her to drop everyone but Puck is going to make people race differently at Strade. You think that Canyon SRAM, Zonda Crypto, is going to, put a ton of effort into leading Kasia, making sure that Kasia has a good shot at that race when Demi is able to drop her so easily on a climb like the Muir. Like, it's going to completely change that one attack, and how easy it was for Demi to ride away from everybody but Puck is going to change things. But that also changed how Phoenix de Koonik raced Omloop Het Nieuwsblad, or Omloop van het Hageland, because they were amazing in the race on Sunday. Like, they were in every move. At one point, there was a breakaway of 5 that was 3 Phoenix and 2 SD Works. Like, they were incredible. They're going to get behind Puck knowing that she's going to be able to challenge Demi. So it's hard to say like whether or not this is going to negatively impact the races coming up with how strong Demi looked when she eventually made an attack, or if, this is going to piss people off and they're going to race differently, because I think multiple teams were like, what the hell was that, and raced completely differently on Sunday. And it is a different race. It's circuits. It's like a totally different course. But the way that the peloton approached Sunday was like, okay, this is what I wanted to see yesterday. Like, what gives? I wanted this kind of racing at the big race, at the World Tour race the day before. And that's just not what we got. And we got like what we would expect from Omloop Het Nieuwsblad. We got at Omloop van het Hageland, which I think that race is often very exciting, the Sunday race, but normally it's following up on a really, really aggressive Omloop Het Nieuwsblad, which is just not what we had Saturday.
I think the overall sentiment is we have a lot of respect for those 4 riders in the breakaway, and it's awesome for them to get that result and recognition, but ultimately we're disappointed in how the race was run, because it is one of the best courses of the classics. It's opening weekend, so there's a lot of questions that we want to have answered, and it was a letdown for a race. So no disrespect to those that got those results, but yeah, very frustrating to watch.
The thing is as well, like if you were going into that race and you had riders who rocked up at Valencia, it was already obvious then that Demi is like in really good shape, right? And no one could hold her wheel. We had that one definitive stage and she was able to ride away there. So I think Gracie made the point that based on how you've been going in those Spanish races, UAE Tour, etc., you weren't going to be that much better by opening weekend. So it was kind of setting the benchmark of what to expect. So we knew Demi was good. So why would you wait as well to let her do her thing and potentially get dropped? Because we've seen it before that is where the move is always made, is on that Kapelmuur. And of course, it was a very different run up to that point in the race. But I'm thinking ahead to Strade, and if I was a DS of a team right now, I mean, we don't know how Elisa Longoborghini is going to show up on the weekend, but I think she would be willing to back herself to be able to go with Demi. We can see that Puck Pieterse is in great shape. I think Felix de Kooning will back her, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're looking to get her extra support up the road, because that can be key in this race. But for every other team, I would say, like particularly Canyon SRAM, Zondo Crypto, every team actually needs to just race aggressively and put people up the road and just put FDJ, Suez, and potentially SD Works under pressure. But that's basically how I'd be racing it. If I was going on, just keep trying and sending people up the road and hopefully get that right break to stick. And, if you do miss that opportunity, then you still try to get more riders across, but waiting for those, and I guess you're going to do a breakdown of the race, Abby, but there will be those key moments in the race where Demi will go. When that's going to be, I don't know, but yeah, who's going to be able to hold her wheel?
I mean, there's being disappointed because you basically didn't get to race your bike, which is what we saw on Saturday. And there's being disappointed because you tried everything and it didn't work out. And I would rather be disappointed because I tried everything and it didn't work than be disappointed because we basically let the race ride away.
Yep. And we've seen in previous editions of Strade that the gambling has paid off multiple times, whether those individuals get caught just before the penultimate climb or the final climb, or on the finish line. Like it does really pay to gamble.
Yeah. I mean, I think Strade will be a different race because we'll have different riders in it. And I think like UAE Team ADQ, they're coming off of a really, really good UAE tour. They've got Laura Gillespie, who's riding super well. And they're the new powerhouse team in the peloton, and they didn't have their A team there on Saturday, but they will for Strade. So I think that with them in the race, there is more likelihood that we're going to have a really aggressive race, or at least see a lot more action than we did on Saturday. And I think FDJ Suez is going to cop a lot of heat for Saturday's race, rightly so, for not taking more initiative, because they could have won this race with Demi and they didn't. They didn't even try. And so I think for them, they'll be looking at this and they'll be thinking what they did wrong and hopefully overcorrecting. And that's going to lead to good racing as well. But I think like looking at Strade, we have a lot of favorites who could win this race. Like the list is actually quite impressive of who could take this win. We have, hopefully Van der Breggen lining up. She didn't race Het Nieuwsblad, but she did race Van Het Hageland. And she said after the race that she didn't feel like she's quite there yet, but I am not convinced because she looked so strong and it really looked like no time had passed, with her on the front. She was basically putting the pressure on every single climb, every single cobbled section. She was the one who made the race. Like she made every single selection happen. She made the final winning move happen. It was like scenes from Liège-Bastogne-Liège circa 2021 when she did a 10-kilometer long lead out for Vollering. It was like scenes from that race when it got to the pointy end and there was only 7 riders left in the move. And she was on the front like the whole time, basically leading it out for Femke Gerritsen. And so I really, really hope she does Strade because I think she's got a good shot of winning it, but at least making it more exciting. Puck Pieterse could absolutely win Strade. Elise Lange-Borghini could win Strade. I think like Kasia doesn't look like she's quite there yet with form, but you never know what could happen, and this race means so much to her. It's like her favorite race on the calendar in the spring, and she's always up there. She's been on the podium like 6 times. She's always a favorite for this race, and it's like, yeah, you can list her every single year, and one year you're going to be right, but that could be this year. And obviously Demi is a huge favorite going in. So I feel like we're looking at a very different lineup and situation for Strade. And I really, really, really hope that means we're going to get a good race. I want like vindication for having to sit through Het Nieuwsblad. Before we like really dive into Strade, which we've pretty much already done a preview, but we can talk a little bit more about it. I want to talk about Van Het Hageland because this is a race that's like always on the Sunday, and it's normally like teams switch in and out riders for this race because it's a bit of a different course, but also it's not a World Tour race, which was such a bummer on Sunday because like you have to find the coverage. You have to dig around and find the coverage. It's not just on like a normal streaming service. And it was such a good race. It was like constant movement. There were groups going and coming back together and going and coming back together. And in the end, there was a lot to talk about between like Femke Gerritsen, who she signed for SC Works Pro Time last year from Park Hotel Valkenburg and kind of came into the team as one of their only signings last year and has a lot of potential. But last year was really a domestique, and now with, you know, Reusser gone, Vollering gone, you've got this kind of gap opened up in SC Works Pro Time where I really wonder if they're going to kind of put more, give more opportunity to Femke Gerritsen to just go to races and maybe learn from Van der Breggen. And is she the next Demi Vollering? Like, I don't know. I guess we'll have to see, because she won the race. She was really impressive. But also, like, the second place, Laura Gillespie, she's coming off of a really, really good UAE tour. And now I'm like looking at her like, man, I should have picked her for my fantasy team because she looks like she's coming into this season so well. Plus you had, you know, everything that Van der Breggen did the whole race, and it just turned out to be such a good race. And it was a bummer that it wasn't easily accessible to viewers, because I feel like this was the race that people should have watched this weekend.
Yeah, I unfortunately didn't get to watch the race, so I'm just going off everything you said. But yeah, I'm curious to see how Femke goes this year. I'm not too familiar. She is a climber, right?
She's kind of I don't know if she's really
a climber,
like come forward with what she is yet. Like really like showed her potential, I guess is a better way to put it.
She looks like Lorena Wiebes on a bike when I see her in the bunch. If Lorena didn't have her Euro Champs jersey, I would get them mixed up a little bit if I didn't get a good eye on them. They have a similar body shape and the way they sit the bike. Gerritsen obviously is not a super sprinter like Lorena, but like she can hold her own in a small group sprint. So yeah, they've got quite a number of those all-round riders in that team that can just take their opportunities and get a good result when given those opportunities when they're not racing for the top riders. And that's always what has been scary about SD Works, is that their domestics can also win races. So yeah, we're certainly going to see more of her. And she was sprinting the group of 7, you know, small, but it's still a bunch of quality riders that she had to sprint against there. So I think, yes, very interesting to see her stepping up into a good, crossover role in that team of domestique, but also winner as well. But it was largely due, as Abby has already mentioned, due to so much work from Anna van der Breggen. She was the most present rider of the day, often on the front for many kilometres, keeping the pace high or doing what she needed to do to keep that brake rolling, keep that momentum. It was a bigger group for quite a while there. It was probably 20, 25 riders. I can't really remember how many there were, but yeah, they whittled it down in that last 50 kilometres, and that was largely thanks to Van der Breggen.
Yeah, and I think like having Van der Breggen back in the peloton I'm just so happy about it. I was excited about it before, but having watched her race at Hageland on Sunday, I'm even more excited about it now, because she races like bike racing of old, like throughout the tactics, throughout the script. She's the team leader in theory, but she's on the front for the whole race, making sure that splits go. And that was one of the best things about Van der Breggen when she was racing, was that she could win almost every race, but she didn't mind working for teammates. And that's one of the huge differences between her and most other leaders on other teams. You had her, she could have won Liège-Bastogne-Liège in 2021, but instead, I believe it was 2021. I'm pretty sure that it was. But instead, she did a 10K lead out for Vollering. Like she's a rider who, time and time again, she doesn't mind putting that incredible energy and ability to race a bike towards her teammates. And that's one of the reasons that SD Works Pro Time is so successful when she lines up for the team.
100%. Could we say the same about Demi?
I don't think so. I mean,
Not
I think
yet.
that was the problem last year with Kopecky.
Yeah, and again, Demi is still really fresh into her career, I suppose, and just different people as well. Like you said, I think with Anna as well, she won everything there was to win, but she strikes me as a person anyway who would want to give back. That said, she has her own ambitions, and I'm sure that on Saturday, we don't know if the official start list is complete, because sometimes those things change. But I wouldn't be surprised to see her as the outright leader and have full support. And I do wonder how they will approach that race, if it's going to be a similar thing to what we saw on Saturday, knowing that Anna's going to be there. Because it must be interesting for her to have been a DS for 3 seasons and now step back into the rider's role. And I mean, she can also be captain on the road when she's not leading the race, like if she's not the outright leader. I could see her and Danny actually bumping heads at times, if I'm honest, in these coming races.
I mean, if Danny's going to direct the team like he did at Omloop and Anna's going to race how she did on Sunday, those are two very different tactics to approach a race. But I also think that, like, obviously the stakes were different for each day. The teams were different. The course is different. So you can't compare them quite like that. But I mean, obviously they get along to some extent because she's decided to come back and she stayed with the team. So she knew she would be working with Danny. So I assume they'll be able to come to some kind of mutual understanding of how the team is going to race Strade. But yeah, I mean, I think like we're going to have a really the lineup is completely different. And like you've got Neve Bradbury is going to be there for Kasia, and I'm excited to see how she goes. Trek has like a totally different team with Neve Fisher-Black, Anna Henderson. In theory, it's not a finalized start list, but they've got, Sprati, Rihanna Marcus, really their climbing team. Most of the teams are just completely different than the lineup that we had at Omloop. And Pauline Ferrand-Prévot, for example, for Visma. So it's going to be very different. And I think for Van der Breggen, she's just, she's going to do what she's going to do. And I don't know how much control Danny actually has over that.
Do you know what trio I'm excited about, just quickly? Is the trio of Sile, Kasia, and Neve Bradbury. I think that can be a really powerful trio.
Yeah, for sure. It'd be interesting to, I'm more interested to see how Sile and Kasia work together. I think Neve is going to be potentially the glue there in that trio, someone that's going to be very heavily relied on to be the backup. I just wanted to go one more thing back about Van der Breggen is her ride on Sunday wasn't 100% altruistic though, remember. She wanted a hard hit out before the bigger races coming up. And she also wants to build trust in her leadership capabilities as well. So she's offered that support in a lower level race to another rider because she's buying chips for the next bunch of races coming up within that team. So that was smart of her also to ride like that. And I don't think that would have been a very tough conversation to have. I think that would have been quite easy to slide through to the keeper to race like they did.
Yeah, very good point.
Mm.
Well, one thing to note about Strade coming up is that it's got more gravel than it has before. They've added gravel. They've added more gravel to the race, so there's 50 kilometers total of gravel this year. It's 10 kilometers more than we've had in the past. So it's going to be in theory, a little bit more challenging, but the finale is still the same. We still have the same finish. But yeah, more potential for catastrophe, more potential for like flats and stuff like that with more gravel. And overall, the race is going to be, it's the same, overall, it's the same thing that we've seen in the past. A punchy course with some dirt thrown in there for good measure.
And it looks like the weather, I heard on the weekend when I was at the race, people were talking about it was going to be bad weather, but it looks like the weather system shifted a bit. Sunday will be a bad day, but it's looking like Saturday might be a little bit damp, but okay, because of course a wet strata is a completely different to a dry strata.
Do you remember 2020 Strada where it the weather, because they had it in the like later in the season because of COVID, and the weather was just
that's
horrendous.
Right. Yeah. It can be
I did
actually quite
a wet
dangerous.
strata, I think in 2018, and it was awful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It was miserable.
Some of those gravel sections can become like almost like an ice skating rink.
Yeah.
Or gluggy.
Yeah.
I hope it is bad weather. That's good for the worse the weather, the better for one person who's not in this race that we don't need to talk about it, but I know someone who loves racing in the rain.
Well, you never know. It could still change, but Sunday doesn't look so great. Saturday, it looks 18 degrees with a bit of cloud, which sounds lovely. I wish I could be there.
Yeah, I've been nostalgic watching these races, and there's a very distinct Euro light through all of the year, and it changes, and the current light that we're getting on even just from through the camera, it makes me feel like, oh, I miss. It's just one of those things that throws me back to the training days and the racing days of just how it feels.
All right, well, a lot to look forward to this weekend, but I think we can wrap this one up. We're going to finish out this episode with an audio diary from Georgie Howe because we miss her today and we want her spicy takes. So that's going to end the podcast. But before we get to that, I am obsessed with my mom. I mean, she's awesome, but she came to Andorra to be here for the baby birth and has been my older daughter Lila's best friend for the last month, and it's been a total game changer. So I'm obsessed with my mom. Also, she's like an amazing cook. So I've been eating very, very well in postpartum, which has been super nice.
That's awesome.
Shout out mom, because she listens to this podcast.
Thanks, mom. I just finished the thing I was obsessed with a few weeks back, the book by Gina Chick, which was called We Are All Stars. We're Made of Stars. Oh, I need to double check what it's even called, but it was probably one of the best memoirs I've ever read, and I'm so sad that I finished it. I knew I would be sad. So I've been obsessed with that, and I feel like that's a book that I'm going to read again. But the new thing I'm obsessed with is Australian Survivor season 10 just started. So my partner Kimberly is one of the biggest Survivor fans that you've ever met. So by proxy, I'm also a Survivor fan, and it's fun watching it together. If we miss an episode that's live, we make sure that we save it and watch it together, and it's fun because we chat. And I feel like my strategy brain is like not that good anymore since having a baby. So it's like, I feel like it's good. It's sharpening me up again.
That's so unsurprising for me, because I'm just thinking back to 2016 in Gavarate when Kimbers was staying there. And we had dinner this one night and we were having a conversation that she kept, I don't even know about what, but we were talking about the zombie apocalypse and like what we would do. Like we were in Europe and our loved ones were in Australia and you couldn't communicate anymore. So what would you do? Like, how would you get back to Australia? Or would you wait in Europe and, you know, maybe your partner would somehow like build a boat or steal a boat and sail across the world? And we had this whole conversation over dinner and I still remember it fondly.
Yeah, I can imagine that.
Yeah. My obsession. I've been watching this TV show on HBO called White Lotus. Has anyone watched it?
Yeah.
Okay, this is funny because I was just going to bring up a combination.
Just started it.
Oh, you're
White Lotus and Survivor.
So good.
Yeah, so I think we're at episode 3 or 4.
The guy who created White Lotus was on American Survivor.
No.
Did not know this.
That's a good bit of trivia.
Yeah.
Fun fact. Like, I think it was like Celebrity Survivor or something. But there's this really awesome clip of him walking around in the forest with like a glass of wine, trying to find a key and talking about how dumb all the other competitors are.
No. But so this is kind of what my husband and I are into at the moment. And there is this book that I'm reading that I'll talk about next week because I need to get the title right. That's a really good read. I got it from the Reese's Book Club. So I've actually picked quite a few books off that list, and most of them have been hits.
Yeah, they're good. She picks good books.
White Lotus is really good too. I'm watching the current season though. I feel like I want to go back and watch the first season.
Yeah, the first 2 seasons are so good. We haven't done the third yet because I don't think we've got the right streaming service for it because we try not to pay for them all at once.
That's what we do. Circulate.
And suddenly it just creeps back in though. You're like, after 6 months, you're like, how are we paying for all of them again?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
What's
got
wrong with
HBO
us?
for cycling, but now like we're actually having a look to see what's on there other than just the sport aspect of it.
Oh, I'm so mad about what I had to pay to watch Omloop Het Nieuwsblad on the weekend because our situation in Australia is still dire following the absence of GCN. SBS gets a lot of the cycling rights and coverage, but we don't get all of it, unfortunately. And I paid the full price for Discovery Plus, which in Australian dollars is a fucking lot.
I heard this from a
Wow.
lot of people. There was a lot of disgruntled viewers after the weekend about the new streaming setup for places. Lauren and I we're really lucky right now in the coverage because it's just max.
Yeah. I can watch quite a lot on Sportsa. On TV we've got Eurosport, but I got HBO. Actually, I got it just for the UAE tour, so I could almost get rid of it, but I need to look at the schedule and make sure I can still watch everything and I have to finish the season of White Lotus.
Yeah, I mean, I think in like continental Europe, we're probably in the best situation because like people in the US and in the UK especially, like, ugh.
Even Scandinavia,
Not
my
good.
colleague in Sweden has been slammed too, so that's a conversation in itself, right? Like, how is this going to impact viewership and building fan base?
Yeah, especially when we're just at the beginning. Like
Yep.
we've
need
only
fans.
just kind of tapped into yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a conversation for a different time. Okay, we'll close out this episode with Georgie Howe. Thanks, you guys.
The drum roll begins, the conductor is warming up the orchestra, and the curtain is rising on the Belgian classics. Omloop Het Nieuwsblad is here. Opening weekend is meant to set the tone for the rest of the classics. We see who is in form, what teams hope to prioritise in terms of racing style, and mostly, who wants it the most. So what did March 1st tell us? Well, in my opinion, hubris dominated. The race saw an early break of smaller teams, so it's a green flag. Time gaps then increased, beige flag, and suddenly there was no concerted chase and the breakaway riding out to nearly a 14-minute advantage by Aldenada. That's a solid, blazing red flag. There were 2 clear favourites in this race, and they belonged to the teams of SD Worx Pro Time and FDJ Suez, with Demi Vollering and Lorena Wiebes. We saw attempts to increase the impetus of the peloton to close the gap to the breakaway after Aldenada, with the likes of Van Dijk from Trek tractoring on the front. However, FDJ Suez and SD Worx Pro Time were clearly willing to absolutely lose the race rather than risk the win. Reports from riders within the peloton suggest both teams completely washed their hands of responsibility to chase, simply citing, "It's not our job." I'm sorry, if you're a team with a rider that has a 50% chance of winning this race, you cannot skirt responsibility here. However, let's just say, in saying it is not our job, the riders on these teams give us a glimpse behind the scenes of this performance. They were right in saying it is indeed not their job to chase. If their boss, their DS in the car behind, is saying do just that, do not chase. They were not lying, they were simply obeying orders. Orders given due to the standoff between former colleagues and now rivals Danny Stam and Lars Boom. Those sport directors in the cars following were giving those riders orders not to chase, instead having a standoff, looking at each other and daring the other to blink first. Now, chapeau to Lotte Klaas, who has the best name in sport, and her breakaway companion Orella Neolo. They displayed integrity in their work and showing they wanted it more. That limping sprint to the line exemplifies the effort of their feet. Let's just hope the will to win outweighs the fear to lose in races to come for the likes of SD Worx Pro Time and FDJ Suez.